Well, good evening and welcome to all of you who have joined us for tonight's OHS and Humanist Canada Officiant webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Martin Frith and I'm on the board of Humanist Canada. And along with Matthew Bin and Ruth Henrik, we've been part of the coordinating team and our presenters in preparing tonight's webinar for you. So this is a first for all of us, and if there are some wrinkles in tonight's presentation, well, we'll just roll with that. But we're all friends, and we're all in this together, and we will be sending out a survey to you afterwards, certainly for your feedback. So what we'd like to do right now is, and just to go over briefly what the format of tonight is going to be, by the way, in a moment, we're going to hear from Matthew Bin and Ruth Henrik to a brief welcome on behalf of COCO and on Ontario Humanist Society Ceremonies Committee. We'll have Mary Beattie will cover off the context for why we're doing this tonight. Why you might be requested for a funeral as a humanist officiant. We're going to break the input up into 4 sections, and the first one will be meeting with the family. The second one will be ceremony structure. The third section will look at resources, and the fourth one will be on graveside and follow-up. And so we'll have separate presenters for each of those. That'll be followed by some question and answers, and then an opportunity for some final comments. And so with that in mind, I'm going to turn to and ask Matt Bin and Ruth Henrik to unmute themselves and to give us a welcome.
Welcome to everybody. We've talked in OHS for some time about doing some sort of training or refresher training or supplementary training and that kind of thing. And this is a real delight to finally get that underway, especially in conjunction with our partners in Humanist Canada. We are a small community of officiants, but we are still pretty big. And it's great to have so many other officiants on with us. That sense of community is really important now more than ever, if I can use that term. It's really important that we do reach out to each other, that we get to know each other, that we help each other, and that we communicate with each other. And I hope that this is the first step in increasing the amount that we allow that we are able to do that. And I do look forward to the excellent presenters that we have on board for this presentation tonight. Thank you again, Martin, for getting this underway, getting this rolling, and for hosting tonight. And let's enjoy this first of many webinars.
Thank you, Matt. And over to you, Ruth.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Martin. Well, hello and welcome. This is an exciting time for all of us. I'm really happy that we've been able to pull this together and get our series underway. Now, during this COVID time, it's nice to pause and take some time and learn something, share and touch base with our colleagues. And we're all colleagues in this. So I'm just finding that this is one of these moments during our lockdown when we can look forward to something and do something a little different. Humanist Canada has been working to, provide additional training materials, and this definitely fits into that category. So I want to thank everyone for their time and their interest. And as Martin said, if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear them.
Great. Thank you, Ruth. And just before we begin, I think it's also really fitting to acknowledge that our presenters this evening, Mary Beattie, who brings with her 16 years of officiating experience, Michael Wheeler, who brings with him 10 years of officiating and experience, Lise Chamberlain, who comes with 9 years of officiating experience, And Tom Cook, I didn't get your numbers in experience.
20 years.
20 years.
Yeah, I'm a little old for my age.
Okay. So 20 years experience. And then Matthew Bin, you have 10 years of officiating experience. Ruth Henrik.
10 years.
And I clock in at 18 years of experience. It's hard to believe it has gone by so quickly. So together our presenters have a wealth of experience, but we also want to be able to draw on and acknowledge that there's a tremendous experience in all of you who are on this webinar tonight as well. And then the final comment I'd wanted to make is that we have compiled a list of resources that we'll be covering off and touching on tonight, but we will be able to provide those for you, and it's an excellent collection, and so we hope that'll be useful for you as well. So having set the table, I'd like to turn to Mary Beattie now if you would, Mary, unmute and introduce this context about why someone would choose any of us as a humanist officiant for a funeral.
All right, everyone. Hello. We have other presenters tonight, and my little part here is very much of an introductory bit. And because I want to send you some information in a small period of time, I may be talking quickly. So I wanted to put this in context to say, first of all, we're all humanists. And for people that don't know, I'm actually also the humanist chaplain at the University of Toronto. I follow Gail McCabe in that role. And I find, even at the University of Toronto, that people don't know what a humanist is. Just like you appear at your weddings and people don't know. All of us have been called members of the Humane Society, humanitarians, various things. And because of that, when people ask us to conduct a funeral as a humanist, if it's a good confluence of circumstances, they know what a humanist is, they've asked for that kind of ceremony, we're all in the same boat, and we can go forward with that kind of planning. In many cases, a funeral, even as opposed to a wedding, may be a situation where the humanist part of it is unknown. A friend of mine who is a chaplain at the university and is a pagan chaplain says he's never been asked to do anything in his own tradition at the hospital. It's always in other people's traditions. So when people are looking for us, they may want a humanist ceremony. They may want a non-religious ceremony. They may want a celebration of life. They may be trying to follow the wishes of the person that you are honoring or his surviving relatives. Or in these days, they may just be looking for anybody who will conduct a simple, respectful funeral in these times. I wanted to have to read very quickly the definition of humanism that I use at weddings. You may know the one that Ontario Humanist Society uses, which is, I'll just remind you, humanism is a non-religious ethical philosophy, a way of life and a way of thinking that involves adherence to strong ethics, an emphasis on human rights, a respect for the earth and its creatures. The humanist works toward creating a more humane and responsible world with a commitment to reason and compassion. I use a shorter one for weddings, which says humanism is an ethical philosophy of living, declaring all people are equal, and that as human beings, we understand we all have a duty of care to lead ethical lives of compassion and respect for each other and the world we share. When I'm conducting a ceremony of any sort, of course, after I introduce myself as a humanist officiant, I'll of course follow that with one of these statements or one that you may use. And that's the point where people's faces usually relax and they smile and they nod their heads because these are things generally that they support and agree with too. And often that's why they've chosen you to conduct the funeral. But I have had situations, and other people may jump in, where the word humanist is alarming. And it may be so to people from religious traditions, or to older people, or to people who simply don't know what this means. And it's not always people who do not have access to ways of learning. I have to tell you that last year at the University of Toronto, we had a philosophy PhD candidate who'd never heard the word. So we should be aware that the awareness of what we do is not necessarily there. And when we approach funerals, we should also understand that, of course, you don't need a license to conduct a funeral. It's not regulated by the province. Anyone can conduct a funeral. And at one point, I think HAC, Humanist Association, and OHS, it was Gail McCabe's idea that we should all teach all of our members how to conduct a simple humanist funeral in case they have to do it. So one of the things we're going to do tonight is to take all of you officiants through ways to interview the family, to get some information, to plan a funeral, how to conduct a funeral, how to follow up, and a memorial, and an interment, and all of those things. But there may come a point when, in this time, when someone else has to do this. So the resources that we'll show you later are resources really which can be shared with anyone. And there's some templates in there where anybody can conduct a simple funeral. And if you think of yourselves as, you know, sailors on a ship, or someone who dies and someone has to say something, I will also say Carol Berry, lovely Carol Berry, used to say to us, the thing about funerals is that people just need somebody to lead them through it. They need someone to be in charge and to help them. And that's really our main goal, is to help the people that have asked you to help in a way that suits them, that has some order. And of course, all of that speaks of humanism, really. Comfort and understanding and compassion. The next thing I want to say, and I'm going to be brief here, Martin, I'm trying to do this really briefly. When we get, I'm a librarian, people, so I did the resources and the bibliography, and we'll show you that later. And in that collection, you'll find all sorts of things. You'll find readings, you'll find definitions of humanism, you'll find a bibliography, you will find ceremonies, sample ceremonies, and I have put on that initials like MW, Michael Wheeler, GM, Gail McCabe, KG, Ken Goldberg, to tell you where they came from. Some of them are from training manuals. We've changed all the names so that they're either person one, person two, father, mother, so they're anonymous, which is of course important, and in general, gender-free. But there will be all sorts of samples, all sorts of things. There will be all sorts of useful things on how to talk to the family, how to get the information that you need, how to plan the funeral. And now I'm going to move on to the second part, which is that I began my career at the United Nations as an officiant. And I am a member of the American Humanist Association, the Humanist Society. So I dialed in on Tuesday to a webinar that they held on funerals in the time of pandemics. It was terribly interesting. I may be able, I have the password, and I may be able to allow you to share that too. The presenters were wonderful and had lots and lots of experience in conducting humanist funerals, but the discussion was about the difficulties that we're facing now. So one part of our brain is back in traditional weddings, traditional funerals, funeral homes, visitations, going in hearses to the cemetery, all of that sort of traditional thing. But we're facing a new reality now. The reality is such, there may not be a body. There may not be remains. No one may be able to attend. there was an article in the paper last week that said, I am going to put on a suit and tie and attend my mother's funeral by Zoom. And how terrible that is. I have talked to people last week who've actually been to Zoom funerals, and I have some resources for you from the American webinar of things to consider going forward in this time. One of the things is that the participants said that not all the funeral homes were managing to ratchet up to consider how to do a funeral without mourners, how to do this new thing. So Martin, do you have that page 6 and 7?
And we'll get to it when we get to resources. But
oh, you want to do that? I was going
Yes.
to talk about it now.
Yes.
So I'll just talk about it briefly.
So,
and
so
finish.
why don't you hold off on that?
I'll hold off.
We'll come to it. But I
And
want
when we
to.
come to that, we'll talk about virtual funerals. All I wanted to
Yes.
say when finishing is that one of the documents that I'm going to show you lays out the difference between a private in-person funeral, a live stream funeral, an entirely virtual funeral, a funeral without the family, a funeral where you're not there. So as you think of all the discussions coming forward from this time, please keep in mind what you as a humanist are doing, and also how this would apply to what we may all be facing in the future. Why they've called you to do something which they cannot do, which may not look like any of the funerals that we have done before. But all of the resources you will see and the speakers tonight will tell you that it's the same path to designing the funeral. That's it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that, setting the context, Mary. Our second section really we'll turn over to Lise Chamberlain, who's going to talk about meeting with the family. Lise.
Okay. Hi, good evening, everyone. This is one of my first presentations, so don't mind me if I'm a little bit nervous. Also, I'm very French, so you may pick up on some of that also. I'm located in Sudbury, Ontario. Here in Sudbury, it's a little bit different than maybe some of your towns where you live. We have 2 funeral homes, and they're basically taken over by one owner, I think, owns 3 locations, and the other one's a co-op. Which I've been called to a few times because I'm French. So I'm able to conduct the ceremonies, the celebrations of life in French, which is very, very good. So an idea for you to get into the funerals, the celebrations of life, is to bring some of your business cards to the homes, the funeral homes. It could also be in shelters, agencies, all kinds of stuff. That's where I put my cards anyway, just so an idea for you. So in starting, I do have, when a couple calls, somebody calls me and the family calls me, I have a set list that I go through. So I don't know, Martin, if you were going to show it at all. But it's a celebration life memorial. So what can that be? It could be, I've had calls for pets because they do consider their pets part of the family. So it could be a pet ceremony that you're doing. It could be a call from the nursing home. It could be a shelter. It could be anybody, a friend, family. That's the type of calls I'm getting. You can be asked to conduct a ceremony in a funeral home, a chapel, a backyard, by the lake, the cemetery, a nursing home, bedside, where our deceased have just passed. It's possible. So when I get a phone call, usually I have my list ready. I have my question list so that I don't make any mistakes. So I start with a contact name, the person that has contacted me, and their phone numbers. I try to get 2 phone numbers as much as possible. The meeting address, because I'm going to go to their home. During this time with the COVID, you may need to ask more questions over the phone than what you would do like going. I think at this time I would do more of this information in a meeting type format than going to a home till we're all safe anyway. And just to, that would be me anyway. So a meeting time and date, that's my format again. The name of the deceased, like I said, it could be a pet. You never know. The date of the proposed service. Now, what happens a lot of times is they want a service like within a couple of days. So you have to really scramble to get all your information, which is, it's okay. So, so the proposed date of the service, the time, and the location that the service is going to be held. And some of the information here. So consider before the meeting, before you head out, you consider it's going to take you 1 to 2 hours. This could be over the phone, over a meeting, or if it's in person, but plan for at least 1 to 2 hours to meet with the family. Once you meet with the family and friends, they start sharing. A lot of them will be very, very emotional. So you may have to pull someone aside in a private room because there could be 10 people there, 20 people. It's not uncommon with large families to have everybody over and they have food all over the place and they want you to eat and all that. You know, it's it could be quite overwhelming. So it may be a good idea for you to pull 1 or 2 people aside to discuss all the information that you require to build the ceremony. So bring extra paper, bring extra pens. That's what I do. Bring a mask if you need to. So you introduce yourself to the family as an officiant that will be conducting the service. You can tell them, as Mary said a while ago, about being an officiant and what it means and all that kind of stuff. Because a lot of times there's a lot of Catholics, there's a lot of the religious people from other religions that are there, and they're unaware. So it's good to just to let them know, and sometimes the way that this works is to get a little job for them in the whole ceremony, and that kind of calms them down, because they call me a chaplain also, they call me a minister, they call me all kinds of things. And so the language also is very important, especially where I live in Sudbury. There's a lot of French people. So because you don't need a license to do funerals, they can get anybody to do the ceremony. So for my French, it's very, very good. So I go back and forth on the questionnaire. In the Funeral Memorial Celebration of Life Human Resources, they have a wonderful agenda that you can present to the family, because as Mary said a while ago, the family doesn't know what to do, where to start, especially if it's within a couple of days. They're all over the place and they just need somebody to direct. So I walk in there and that's what I'm doing. I take over this part for the ceremony, organize the ceremony. So you can indicate the introductory music, words of welcome, thoughts on life and death, non-religious perspective. The agenda is in the book. So if you did the officiant training, but also the resources online. Changes to, yeah. So you present the agenda to the family and see if they're okay with it. If they're not, I mean, if they want to do something different, this is your opportunity after you've read it to them to say, is there any changes you want to the agenda? Do you want to substitute anything? Do you want to put anything in? We add, we remove. This is your occasion. This is just a suggestion. They are the ones that are going to do the bottom line, are going to make the decision on what they want in the ceremony. So I have notes here, so hang on a second. So you listen, they're going to be all over the place. You're going to have, I mean, the less people you have with you, the better it's going to be. I guarantee you that, because everybody's got stories and then they all start crying and all that. You want the key points on the day of death. The hospital, were they surrounded by family and friends? Were they married? Did they have partners? They have children, grandchildren. So that's where my list goes. I have family, friends to be introduced, included in the introduction, the spouse, the partner, what was the relation to the deceased, the children, the grandchildren, friends, also organizations. They may have belonged to Club Richelieu, or I'm not sure, the Mousses, or I'm not sure. Anyway, Veterans Association, whatever. It's also good. I have a section for that where you can write that down, and that would be good to present during your little celebration. So anything that stood out with the deceased, favorite saying, I had some that were quite funny, actually, that brought a little bit of humor in the ceremony. And that kind of, everybody could just see everybody just relax. And so that was fun to bring something that's humorous. Who was their best friend, and what was the career? How many years? Were they retired? Were they still working? What was their favorite poems, songs, movies, stuff like that you can add. You know, they were an avid cyclist or motorcyclist or something. That's always fun for the family to be able to talk about all the positive things that this person did in their lives. So also, I've got anything else you think you'd like to mention, anything else. So I've got sections on that. So then I go into the music, because they're not, and this is optional. You don't have to have music at all. But it's not your responsibility to organize the music, but this is where they can assign it to a family member. So what I have here is at the gathering, the reflection and the closing would be nice if that's what they want, if they're okay with that. If not, then it's fine. It's just a suggestion. So usually I'll ask if there's anybody in the family that would like to offer a eulogy. We usually get, it could be a special friend. So I'd say, okay, well, then if the funeral's in the ceremony's in 2 days, then this person needs to start writing right now so that we're ready. If they're not sure, then they can send it to me. I can look it over and reflect on that person or that pet or whatever the situation may be. Would you like to have any other family friends share ceremonies? It could be a poem, or they could, I've had people, they'll stand up and they'll sing. They'll have a beautiful song, or they'll just play a musical piece, guitar or piano or whatever. Also, what I ask is if they have any notes, diaries, journal, or writing by this individual. This could be somebody that's very good at writing stuff, and it would be to read one of their, to put it in the ceremony and read it. I also ask if they have, if they're married, do they have a partner, and how did you meet? So I put a little bit of that in the ceremony. Is there any other significant relationship or friendship that you'd like to mention, which is usually you'll get a lot of information in this. Like I said a while ago, work experience, the name of the companies, the name, number of years they worked, if it's appropriate. Any of this, if you feel that you shouldn't be mentioning, don't. Like, if you don't think it's the right time to ask any questions, don't. Is there any special nicknames that you want to, that you would like the person referred to in the ceremony? Anything in life in your life in which you're particularly grateful for, life with your spouse, your partner, and your friend. Was there anything special you want mentioned? I know it's like a lot of questions, but it's fantastic because it'll help you when you build the ceremony. All of these things, even if it's very little, will help build the ceremony. Displays, you could talk to them about displays. That's very common. Any photos of yourself or your partner or the deceased, any artwork, pictures, if it was a photographer, anything. And again, that's optional if the family wants to do that. But again, we're there to let them know that these are things that, that regularly are seen at funerals. We don't organize it, they do. It gives them something to do. And if the time is short, well, then they may decide they don't want to do it, and that's fine. So the other one that I have, and it's very, very important, is there anything else that you wish that not to be mentioned or referred to during the ceremony? It could be an ex-partner. It could be somebody, a friend that they don't want mentioned. It could be an ex-partner's name. It could be anything. Whatever it is, you need to ask the question. That's very, very important, because you could hear something from somebody and think that it's okay to put it in there, and it's not. So you need to ask the question specifically, is there anything that you do not wish to be mentioned or referred to during the ceremony? Okay, now at the end of that's my little guideline that I use. And before you leave, try to give as much support as you can to the family. Tell them that they can call you. Ask them, say to them, if you have any changes whatsoever, please don't hesitate to call me. You can even offer your draft ceremony. If that's what they want, then that's fine. They can look at it. That's fine. If they're looking for ideas on poems and that, like Mary said, we have lots of resources online. We can do some of that. You can offer some of those in there. Your ceremony should not be more than 30 minutes at most. That's my guideline. If you want to go a little bit longer than that, well, then you make that choice, but I tend to keep it to 30 minutes. Also request a copy of the obituary as a reference. I find that interesting for names and the spelling of names and stuff like that, that I put in my ceremony, and the children's name or the partner's name, in case I didn't hear it right. Verify the time, the date, and the location of the service again before you leave. If they're not sure, you tell them to call you as soon as possible, so that to make sure that you have the time frame. If it happens that they change the time and you're busy and you have something else come up, I'm sure there are other officiants in your area that could help you out. I have other officiants that can help me out, that would step in at that point, after discussion and all that. My husband's an officiant also, so he could do it very well, no issue. So ask that you be called for any further changes, date, time, and location. Leave your business card. I always leave my business cards with them. That way, because in this time, they're grieving and that, and they may not be able to find you again, because you may have received a call from the funeral home trying to set you up with the family. So let me see here.
So we're going to need to.
That's about it for me, Martin.
Beautiful. And
yeah, that's it. I went through my whole form.
So thank you, Lise, for that wonderful introducing us to dealing with the family and the complexity. And apologies for those of you who are expecting the questionnaire. That will be in the material that will follow. We didn't have that prepared to be on the screen tonight. So
okay, that's fine.
So thank you so much, Lise.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
And so now for the second portion on ceremony structure, we'd like to call on Tom Cook.
Present.
Thanks, Tom.
Hi, thanks, Martin. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I was really surprised when I started teaching trainees for some of our sessions for new officiants. When we got to the funeral part, one of the questions that trainees wanted to have answered was, how do I explain humanism? And I gave them a little line that I use. It's much shorter than Mary's, but it's very helpful. It's very short and sweet. I would say something like, humanism is a positive philosophy of life, which embraces very familiar values, such as democracy, compassion, and reason. And then that's it. If someone wants to ask you afterwards what we're about, we can always answer that. So the goal with doing a funeral or a celebration of life is, again, you're under pressure. There's no two ways about it. You may have 2, 3, 4 days, that's a luxury, to gather information on the deceased and to prepare a good eulogy. The heart of the eulogy is the tribute to the deceased person. One of the best kept secrets that I found out in my experience was that the funeral homes have a little thing called a letter for clergy information. And it looks something like this. Now this also has the deceased name, rank, serial number. He was in the Air Force. His date of birth, date of death, the time and date of the funeral, the place, the disposition. For example, in this one, excuse me, was cremation at the local crematorium in Simcoe County. The next of kin. And then another one, which was even better, was this one. You notice it even has a photograph of the deceased. And this was a major in the Air Force who actually reached the wonderful age of 95 years, 3 months, and 27 days. How do I know this? Because it's all on this wonderful sheet of paper. It tells me where he was born, where he died, his mother and father, his daughters, and his home address and telephone number, where the funeral is being held, the funeral chapel, where the reception is being held, it was a different place. And on the back, look at this. This is a gold mine. This is the whole family tree on the back of this page, which gives you a leg up on what you're going to do for your tribute. So the other way to gather information that I've found is really helpful. I used to train foster parents, and I used to recruit them first, of course, before the training. And I would try to get a good handle on their family structure and their upbringing. And we developed a thing called a genogram. Not my invention. It's been around for, I don't know, 20 years, I guess. This is a very primitive form of a genogram. See the circle for lady, square for man. This is the deceased in the center here. He was killed in a car accident. This is his wife from his first marriage and their daughter. And over to this side is his current partner, also a male. That's the same-sex wedding. Now in the middle here, you'll see, I don't know if you can see this on the screen. Maybe my light's too bright here. You'll see a little, right here, 2 little diagonal lines. That means that these two are divorced. On the top, you'll see a little X here and an X on that, meaning that the parents are deceased. But that's a very simple form of a genogram. You can do a really well-developed one where you have a large family, say 5 or 6 siblings, and you can start with the oldest and work through to the youngest, so on, and get the connection. And then when you get to the deceased, sometimes, of course, these days, people have 2 or 3 marriages in their life, so there may be other people coming to the celebration of life, so you may want to include them. But again, as Lee said, make sure you check with the local people that this is okay, it's acceptable. I did mention to my colleagues that you should never experience this in your life as an officiant. I actually did I did a celebration of life where a riot broke out and the undertaker had to call the police to separate the 2 sides. They weren't fighting over the deceased. They were fighting over his last will and testament. They all wanted the money. Very sad. And you may find this too when you're at a funeral. You have to think on your feet. I had an occasion where I interviewed the spouse of the deceased. His wife was, of course, grief-stricken, and his best friend was in the room with us, and we went through his background. And the best friend kept nipping at my toes, so to speak. What are you? What are you doing here? Where's your church? And what about John? That's not his real name. What about John here? I said, well, I've been asked to do a humanist celebration of life. I'm a humanist officiant, made it very clear. However, on the day of the celebration of life, when I invited people to come forward to speak, as I usually do, this particular individual jumped up, took a Bible out of his back pocket and said, John would never want this to happen. I'm here to fix this shit, quote unquote. And he started opening the Bible and making quotes. So what do? What would you do? Well, I did exactly nothing, because to draw attention to it, to ask for him to be removed, would give him some kind of credibility with it, that he's the good guy in this scenario. However, he did write to the widow and to me after the ceremony and offered a profound apology, saying that he didn't realize, he didn't accept that this is what John actually wanted, was a non-religious celebration of life. He had his own agenda, of course, and felt compelled to add that into the scenario. So the other thing that can happen actually is that some funny things can happen. With the Air Force Major, his granddaughter, who of course, given his age, his granddaughter was about 35, I think, if I remember correctly. And she had written a poem for her granddad, and she had asked me if she could read the poem. I said, of course. And when it came, the time it was appropriate, I invited her to the front, to the podium, and she came up and started to read her poem. Very tearful, of course, but that was okay. People cry at the podium. Unless they can't continue at all, please let them cry for a little bit, and then they can continue after that. However, this granddaughter of the deceased had a wonderful little 3 or 4-year-old boy who missed his mother. And he came forward, and she was wearing a summer dress. So it was like 30 degrees outside. He went underneath mommy's dress like it was a tent. Okay, can you picture this? And while mom was reading her poem, little guy decided he couldn't see anyone. So he lifted up the front of her dress like this and looked this way and this way to see everybody, which brought howls of laughter. The poor girl wondered what was it about her poem that was so funny. She didn't even notice that her little boy was actually camping out with her. So there can be periods of joy at celebrations of life, and also periods where you do have to intervene. An example of that is another funeral in the same funeral home. A couple showed up with their little boy, and obviously the little boy was in charge. He was probably, again, 3, 4, or 5, and very raucous, running up and down the staircase in the funeral home. And when the celebration of life started, they were at the very back of the room, and they created a lot of ruckus with trying to entertain this child. So when the first speaker got up, I ran around to the right, down the corridor to the back, because I wanted to ask them to leave. It was so disruptive to the celebration. The funeral director intercepted me on the way and said, "What's going on?" And I explained, "Could you please ask this couple and their child to leave? They're being very disruptive." So they were ejected out into the parking lot, 30-degree heat again. It's unfortunate, but sometimes you have to do that. Not very often. It won't be your experience. What's happening today, following up on what Mary's saying, I doubt very much that too many of you, and anytime soon, will be doing a full-length funeral, which would be anywhere up to an hour, depending on how many speakers. The local funeral directors in Simcoe County have now issued an edict that they consider a eulogy to be the perfect time of 5 minutes. I'm being serious. They're not saying 10 minutes, they're saying 5 minutes is a good time to eulogize someone. Also, the funeral directors, of course, are not having anyone come into the funeral home, although that is a great place. It always has worked for me initially, to meet with the family, because they have these wonderful private rooms. They serve coffee and tea, of course. And above all, it's quiet, because if you interview them at home, again, my experience, or somewhere else that's available, someone knows they're there, they will be bombarded with phone calls. "I'm so sorry. I offer you my condolences. I'm here to speak to you." And all the bereaved people that I've met feel compelled to answer these calls. And there you are, sitting, waiting with your pen and paper in hand, waiting to continue to gather the information. So the best plan for that is, if you can speak to the people in advance and say, "Look, I'm going to need at least an hour, maybe 2 hours of your time. Can you please have someone else, if you can't do it, answer the phone for you, because we may be interrupted, and give us that time so that we can gather the information on John." And lastly, what I do is when I'm leaving them, I'll say something like, "I've gathered a lot of information today. I'm going to use this as a compilation to try to present the very best outline I can for a celebration of John's life. But if I've misunderstood something or I've mislaid something, I'd like to reserve the right to call you, to phone you. Here is my card if you'd like to call me, and I reserve the right to call you if I need more information." And of course, no one's ever turned down that offer. 100% of people have said, "Yes, we'd love to cooperate with you." So I wish you well. I know weddings are a lot more fun, but we are here to do all of the services that are required of us. Celebrations of life, baby namings, and even, we never heard of this, but excuse me, divorces. So just briefly, 30 seconds, what is a divorce ceremony that humanist officiants perform? You get the couple together with their guests, and they give back all their gifts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, for finishing on a note of levity. So next, we'd like to turn the things over to Mary, who's going to cover resources. So Mary,
I will reiterate that the resources section is a work in progress. I see that what we'll probably end up doing is making some topic folders so that we'll put the things like Lisa's questionnaire, that kind of thing together for you for interviewing the family, and checklists. And then we have training materials from both OHS and HC. Some of the examples that you'll see in the resources are the two things together. There's one by Mandy St. Germain, which was a very, just like Tom, is a very complicated family with many relationships. And it can be characterized by saying that the invitation that went out to the family said, everybody bring a bottle of whiskey. So Mandy goes through everything in a list, what she asked, what she found out, and then she shows you the ceremony that she created, which is extremely personal. So the two people before us have said the kind of questions that you ask, and some of the resources will show you what emerged as the actual written script with all the little details and how the family details and how they handled difficult situations, emotional situations. And the samples run all the way from a wonderful, rather formal funeral written by Ken Goldberg to some of like this one of Mandy's that's very, very open. And if you range all those examples together, I think you can see a progress in the types of requests that you'll have. Of course, there are funerals for children. There are funerals for people who have died in places where they have never returned. There are all sorts of different kinds of situations, and many situations where you can't ask the family or you can't ask these questions. So these outlines will show you different ways to handle the planning. In the bibliography part, we have the books that everyone has offered, including the British Humanist Association Manual by Sarah York, Remembering Well, and the Funerals Without God, and some books that you can find. Some of them are available as Kindle. There are a couple of media resources. There's a video of Martin Frith, which he has let us see, conducting a funeral of David Potier, I think that's right. So you can watch an entire funeral conducted by Martin. Martin has also, in the resources section, allowed us to upload a 22-page book a manual that he's written, which is very complete. And thank you, Martin. And I think the wealth of resources here should give you, in this time to read these things, I think you'd feel much more comfortable beginning to think about the questions. Now, the last resource, as I said, I attended the American Humanist Association webinar, and there is a video which they allowed me to post by a celebrant named Sarah Jane, and it's called Virtual Funerals During the Pandemic. It's a webinar, it's a discussion. And as part of the other resources, this document that I was talking about earlier, which is called LifeWeb Resources for Virtual Memorials. Now, LifeWeb is a company, and you'll see as you go through this document that they'd like you to buy their software and do things. But it has a lot of very useful ways to think. One of the charts that I was talking about will tell you for a funeral or memorial service, they will list the different forms of funerals during the pandemic. There we go. And thanks, Martin. And for instance, private in-person funeral service. You and the immediate family will gather together in person, which will be private and intimate, and you can share this with others by sharing a transcript. And that would be 10 people or less and your funeral director. And in each of these fields, it says the pros, it's easy, consider you might leaving people out. As you go down, live streamed or recorded, in person or virtual, entirely virtual, which two friends of mine have now attended. So you gather in your house and you join a video conference call, just like we're doing now. We could be holding a funeral at this point or a memorial service. On page 2, larger in-person celebration where people get together. That's the one we're more familiar with. And these days, the funeral may take the form of a Zoom meeting. The celebrant might be Martin in the middle, and everyone is dialing in by Zoom. And if you're lucky, you can put the things to read on the page and pictures of the person. But what I wanted to say, and what came out in this seminar, as we know, older people may not have access to technology. If we're fortunate, they might have a phone. They might have someone with them. How do you celebrate a funeral when it might just be you, or it might be you and 2 people, and everyone else is dialing in? And what do you do for older people? The suggestions have been very good. You get together, you assign roles, you assign jobs, and I'll get to that in 2 seconds. You'll see a way to think about this. But for people who cannot attend, you would tell them the agenda. You would find, if they have email, that's great. In these cases, you would be able to create something where you say, we're going to start at 8 o'clock. We're going to light a candle all together at 8:15. We're going to all sing this song together. Or if you have a recording, we're going to play this music. We're going to have a moment of silence together. I want you all to think of this person and think of when you first met them or something wonderful about them. I attended a half virtual funeral where we called out the decades, and the people that were involved in that decade, we thought about them at that time, and then the next decade and the next decade. So make your brain creative and look at this chart and think, what can I do if someone just needs to have the conclusion, the sending off, the internment, the memorial, to involve people who cannot go? And there are pitfalls. If we go down to the bottom sheet, Martin, I think that was page 11, it says key elements of the service of a virtual funeral. Would you prefer live stream or an invite open content? Would you like to lead the service? Would you like to share videos, But under step 3, delegating family roles and responsibilities. The criticism that I have heard of virtual funerals of people that have attended them lately is that even if there's 5 people at the graveside, whoever had the cell phone, half the time there's no signal, or it's looking at the ground, or you can't see people's faces, or it drops out. So it says, here are a few roles: master of ceremonies, somebody technical to operate this live stream, a person to design this stream, people to distribute an invitation, a slideshow, a music playlist, special speakers for the formal part. These are just like people we're already talking about in planning a funeral, but we have to take our brains around, how would you plan a virtual funeral? So even if you're planning a celebration of life in a year, or to get together when you can, we have to think of the best humanist way possible to make people feel this was a real event in which their presence was important, and they were there. I leave it at that because we all have thoughts about this, but in the resources which we've listed, there is this document, and there is also the link to the webinar on virtual funerals. The last thing I wanted to say is that there are checklists, there are the sample funeral services, and we have divided these into the funeral services and the graveside ones. And I think I'm going to be followed by graveside, am I, Martin?
Yes.
Okay, good. So any questions about anything you want to contribute, to send to me? Anything you want to ask about the resources, just send a note. The end.
Beautiful. And thank you so much, Mary, for, again, you You are a librarian, true and true. So people are welcome to send you some additional resources that could be included in the guide as well. Is that correct?
Please do that. And we'll just keep developing the resources. My only request is that if you could make the funeral or the samples anonymous, the same way we do in weddings. We don't want to send a sample off to someone someday and find out that it's their uncle that we had in the document. So just change it to a name or anonymous or something. That's all.
Lovely. Thank you.
So we know who wrote it. All right.
Thank you so much.
Martin, can I just jump in, and may I suggest that anything that's being sent for the resources be sent through your committee chairs?
Okay.
Just to make it easier, because you already have their email addresses.
Right. And we'll make the resource available that in a Google Drive or however. Stay tuned for that. Thanks, Ruth. So our last but not least, our final presenter, Michael Wheeler, who's going to talk about graveside and follow-up. And then following that, we'll be opening it up to questions, and I'll have a little more to say about that in a moment. So Michael, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. What I'd like to say is that much of what I might say in preparation has already been presented to you. But overall, when I have been involved in some both traditional and non-traditional internments, and I'll get into the details with that, I think our role ends up being something of not just simply being the person who knows what to do, but we're there to set a certain tone, to listen, to empathize, to bring people together in our pulling this funeral together. And as people have indicated, it's important that those who are significant people have a role and have a say in being part of the film, beyond the, but careful not to go beyond any larger time limit, and to give them very specific roles. We're in the COVID-19 era, but this isn't going to last forever. And the important thing there is to recognize that we're doing a bit of both. A lot of emphasis has been on the virtual ceremonies, but there are others as well. A couple of things I'd like to add. Funeral homes, this is one of them here, often have documents. And with them, I don't know whether you can see this not, but literally you get things like family trees. They will, what Tom was talking about, and they are often available beyond also the documents that Tom referred to, which are very, very helpful. I also, that is with the more traditional funerals, and I know that as well. Matt was saying that I have a unique role here in Toronto and the environment here. I do a fair number of funerals and celebrations of life with people from homeless shelters, from the and women's shelters. And that takes on a different role because you are creating often a community around the person who has died. And it is very helpful, and everyone's talked to this, about meeting together. Now that in the case of some, the meeting in the funeral home is a good place for it to be. And if you can't, then you are looking at, and in my case, often there will be social services involved, and you can ask them, is there a place where central, where we can meet and bring people together? Because the people involved in their lives, such as social workers and in some cases nurses and others, also can be a part of that discussion because they're going to bring another perspective into things. The larger question I often ask is, beyond being specific, what made this person special in your life? It's just an open-ended question. And I have been amazed at the ability to people to put things either in words or and on the page, or to tell you and you are transcribing what they have to say. So I suppose the other is that I'm also involved with what they call the rehabilitation hospitals. Bridgepoint is one here. And you're there at the end of life. I have been there with regard to an end of life that was physician assisted. And you are there to then step from that role later on in terms of that connection that you have with them. It's really up to you. You can make this role as much or as little as you want. The other thing that I often emphasize is with humanism is the respect for other traditions that are valued by the people there, the inclusivity in terms of who we are as humanists, in terms of other traditions that are valued to people and by which they live. And also the thought that you are there for the final words, you are there to bring closure, you are there for healing, I would say. And that is also part of your role. So in the internment, and the document is there, I've sent along, there is a committal ceremony for the urn and ashes, which can be adapted to the, and you can see it up, and you can see the introduction to the humanism is not in here because I'm assuming it's been done in the actual funeral service. This is what we have here. If you just want to go down, we say our goodbyes, we're committing the ashes. Now, before we start this, often I will have people, one person whose only role is to give each person a flower from the florals displays there. And when we come to do the actual burial and putting it into the ground, they are invited to either put the flower in or pick up some bit of earth, if that is their tradition, and put it in on top. And that can also happen with that. I offer, and you see her husband wanted this poem. That came out of the poems that I offered to them in readings. Afterglow is well known to us, and it is one of the ones that seems to strike a chord with people. The other, may I say, in terms of over the years, is Margaret Mead also has a marvelous poem that really speaks to people, and it is called Remember Me. Those are two that seem to catch people's attention and the sense that this is what we'd like to say, and this is what we'd like to hear. So as you go through here, it tells you right through down to, and the tribute being done. Often if I've asked people if they didn't speak at the funeral, or in some cases they can't be at the funeral, but they are offered, they do come to the internment. And so I always make sure that that those who did not have an opportunity to go to the funeral service itself has a place in this. If not, you can also, in terms of the virtual services, also bring that kind of inclusivity as well. Beyond that, I am here, as we all are, to offer our support for you and to share with you our resources. And you can hear from all of us too. It's wonderful that you would consider doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And so with that being said, Michael, thank you for finishing up with those wonderful words. We're going to now, and I realize it is 8:10 at the moment. We planned to finish up at with 75 minutes. So we have a few minutes for questions. And if those of you would like to hang on a bit longer, we can deal with those. Now, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen there's a hand, and if you wanted to put your hand up, literally, and if you're able to speak, I'm going to open up the microphone for you so you could ask your question directly. So Marianne Farah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Marianne, go ahead.
Fantastic. I was hoping to walk away tonight with, I guess, a bit of a more formal structure. You know, there's the introduction where you introduce yourself and you define what humanism is. And then what comes next? For some reason, I went through our presentation tonight and I learned a lot, and yet still I feel like, what do I say next? Do I immediately start talking about the person's, childhood, or do I talk about their wife and kids, the husband, the family members? So I don't know. Does anybody have maybe a few sentences about the paragraphs that, the subject of the paragraphs that follow sensically or reasonably in a funeral?
So, and if any of the panelists, if you wanted to open up your mics and respond to that, Marianne, it's Martin, and certainly I think in the guide material that you'll see is that there's, in terms of that ceremony structure, opening words, an opportunity for readings, an opportunity for people to share some memories, the interment, so that there is a structure that is that you'll see in all of the material provided. And so is that the kind of direction that you were looking for?
Yes, and I guess it is going to be in the materials, as you said, but even if there's a sentence or two that could be said to define that further now, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
Okay.
Who would like to respond of our panel? Mary.
I'm just going to talk about the resources. Marianne, as I said, there are many different styles of sample ceremonies, and those will show you words that can be said in different situations, because as everybody has said, this is going to be a big range from something more like a big family picnic outing to a formal funeral home to just standing around, and things will vary. But in the materials, like the ones that we sent in training, the outlines are very clear. You wait for the family to come in a funeral home. You introduce yourself. You say why you're there, and all of the examples are very similar, because even if they're friendly, even if they're formal, even if they're traditional or not, you're like a wedding, you're following the same steps. So your question about when you talk about the person, if you look at the funeral outlines, you will say, this is an opportunity where you talk about their childhood or ask someone to do that. The creativity lies in the fact that you take those outlines and then you will, in consultation with the family, will see what the best way to do that might be. And Martin is a good person to talk about how to adapt that. I'm going off.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. Michael.
You have this template. There is a template for the funerals and memorial services. And that also, if you wanted to speak in terms of the kind of we're doing, that's available.
Right. That's in the materials that you'll have a chance to receive. So if we could, I'm assuming that people would like to go a little longer and answer and to deal with some questions. So Carol Voth, we're going to open up your microphone. Go ahead, Carol.
Hey, am I on?
You're on.
Okay, so my question is, when we're meeting with the family and we're making up the ceremony, do we have to be concerned? Like, I would want to review anything in advance that they would put forward, but do we have to be concerned of any family members that might want to have a reading from the Bible or something like that, that another family member that may be religious? And should we be concerned about that? And do we have to say no? Should we allow it? You know,
Sure, great question, Carol. And I'd be happy to a quick answer from my perspective, and that is that I personally don't worry about it. And one of the things that I'm always mindful in any of our rituals that, you know, it's not about me; it's about either the couple being married and or the deceased and the family. Well, it's not a reading that I would share to recognize that there's a mix of folks, and if this is part of their grieving and that's something that's going to be helpful for you, a fundamental principle I have is funerals are for the living. And so if this is something that's going to be helpful to an individual or individuals present, then it's useful. Now, I don't know if others have a response to that.
I'll just say again, as the librarian, that the same thing with weddings. People have an idea of how something should be because they've only been to certain weddings and certain funerals. And that's why another thing in the kit are suggested readings. And I have found that some of the books as well are very helpful because what they're offering you is parallel readings. So if you offer samples, I usually make a selected thing of maybe 10. And I say, do any of these readings appeal to you? Would someone like to read these? And I find that once people are given resources, they often end up selecting the resources that we have suggested rather necessarily than a Bible verse. But they have to be given the resources first in an understanding way.
Right. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Mary. Okay, Carol, I hope that answers your question.
yeah, thank you.
Great. We'll now move to Susanne Sene in Kitchener. Susanne.
I actually just wanted to suggest a book for Marianne. It's one we've used in training sessions called Funerals Without God, a practical guide to non-religious funerals. It's by Jane Wynne Wilson and it's published by the British Humanist Association. It contains step-by-step instructions on how to build the funeral ceremony, lots of good examples of wording, not in a template format, but in an example format, which in my own funeral officiating, I found very inspiring as a guide. And it really helps you focus the conversation with the family as well as your own thoughts afterward as you're putting the notes that you took into words. I found it to be a very good resource. I would, and I think you can get it for about $5 through Amazon as an online ebook. It's probably the best $5 you'll spend in your life. I'd recommend that.
Okay. Thank you, Susanne. We've got a few more hands up, and let me turn for a moment to one of the written questions. So here's one. It's very pragmatic from Josh. Can I ask, can you talk about pricing and how compensation works? So who in the panel would like to speak to that? Gosh, don't all jump at once now.
Yeah, I'll speak to it. One, in talking to the funeral home, I get a guideline from them as to what to charge from their perspective. And the second, and that in turn gives me a range or an idea of what be appropriate. I know them a little bit better. They would also have a sense of where they are coming financially. And the second is that if you're dealing with social services, they have a set fee. Anything to do with anything outside of that, and then that's already done for you.
And the social service set fee is?
$150.
Okay. And there's no negotiating.
There's no negotiating.
Right. The other question about compensation is simply, it's, you know, you're not going to be compensated as you would be for a wedding, typically. Depending on where you are in the country, and certainly our province for all of us, is I understand from Tom and Barry that the fee is, what's the fee in Barry, Tom?
Sorry, Martin, put my phone back on.
Oh, the fee in Barry?
$100 and $250. And when you arrive at the funeral home, they give you a little envelope. Thank you very much. Check inside.
Right. So one way of dealing with fee if it's around funerals, if you're not comfortable, is typically the funeral home will look after it, and you can receive whatever they provide, which is what they generally provide to clergy. I know some of our officiants want to deal with the fee with themselves, and some families will want to deal with that with you. But I could tell you in Toronto, for instance, the fee could be as high as $400 to $500. But it wouldn't be that in a whole variety of places, and it does vary from funeral home to funeral home. So Josh, I hope that answers your question. Now, if we could go to Sue Lefebvre. Sue, if you're unmuted.
Hello. Thank you very much, Martin and Ruth, and all these speakers. My God, you've all been wonderful, and I've learned a lot from you. I have my very first funeral coming up in July, and I don't know what it's going to look like, and neither does the deceased's wife. And it's a bit of an odd situation because it was a second marriage for both of them, and they didn't have any children, and she doesn't get along with his family, and oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff. I can see Michael going, yeah. So, I mean, I will swim through that. Don't worry, I will manage it. I don't know whether it's going to be a virtual ceremony or whether it's going to be an in-person ceremony at this point. What I've been doing with the client is right away, by the way, I brought up right up front that my fee is $400 for all my ceremonies. And that's it just is what it is. And if you don't like that, that's fine, that's good. However, so what I've been doing with her is, because he died in January and she's got his ashes in a cupboard in the hall, and she wants some closure from this ceremony. I've been toing and froing back with her, I send her a copy, and she says, oh yes, this is good. Change his mother's name and all the rest of it. So we've been doing that, and she seems to be fine for now. And Michael, I want to thank you for your words about the urn, because she said, well, what do we do when we bury him, when we put his urn in the ground? And I was like, let me think about that and get back to you. So this was a really timely this was a very timely thing for me, and I'm very glad that you held it. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Ruth.
Well, thank you, Sue, and please don't hesitate to reach out to any of our panelists if that would be helpful in doing that preparation.
Yeah, no, I won't. Where are the resources going to be posted?
And Ruth and Matt, where will they be posted?
We'll be putting them up in our shared Google Docs on the Humanist Canada Google Docs.
Which I don't have access to.
We'll send all of you a link. Yes. And
we'll send a link, okay?
Yeah. Excellent. So we have a few. Oh, thank you, Sue. We have a few more questions. Alyssa Lilico is asking, dealing with the emotions when doing a service for a close friend. I'm assuming you're meaning how do you deal with your personal emotions as an officiant when you're doing a service for a personal friend? Who would like to speak to that?
Okay, Martin, if I could give it a try, please.
Sure, Tom.
Okay. Listen, what happened once, my very best friend died and left me, and I didn't have, of course, any trouble writing his eulogy. However, when I practiced at home, and when I tried to do the first 2 or 3 minutes, I would burst into tears. And I had to do that, I think, at least 10 times before I decided, look, I can't just stand up at the front and cry in front of everyone. I've got to get by my own grief to do a wonderful tribute for my best friend. And that's what it was. So I just grieved in front of my partner, excuse me, and was able to master myself on the big day and give them a good send-off.
Great, thanks, Tom. So, and the only thing I might add to that is, I mean, there's, again, speaking of creativity, is that you might want to do that service with someone. One of the things I'm mindful, I was in a circumstance similarly, and I chose not to officiate the service because I realized that as much as they had wanted me, I was able to put together a group of folks to actually officiate. And because I realized that I was one of the grievers, and because the relationship was so close, it was not one that I could be in that capacity to contain it for everybody else, is that I needed to be a griever. And so sometimes it's making that decision as well. So, so those are a couple of options to consider. So if we could, a couple of last questions. I know it's 8:25. Are people okay till 8:30, and then we'll wrap things up? Julia Levine, if you would unmute.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a couple of things I'd like to comment on. First of all, Michael, thank you for that comment when you said the goal for us when we're creating a funeral or a celebration of life is to make the person special. And from my experience writing funerals and celebration of life services is the most challenging, time-consuming, and most rewarding experience, far different than doing weddings, which are often very similar. The opportunity to do them is really a gift. And I also would like to say that I kind of think of it almost as being a stage manager. And I don't want that to sound insensitive, but when I'm creating a celebration or a funeral, I am very clear with the family that all of those who will be partaking in the funeral is all set up ahead of time. Their time is set up ahead of time, and what they're going to be participating and saying is ahead of time. So, Tom, I will say that in mine, there's no open mic. There's no time for anyone from the floor. I'm pretty actually really stern on this point. I don't open it up to the floor. Having been in some where it's become well, it's not been good. So I do say that when I do structure it, it is very structured as far as who's going to be saying and how long they'll be speaking, and that length of time. So I don't know how the rest of you feel about that, but I don't open it up to the floor at all. And the second thing I would say is too, I agree with Mary at the beginning. I will give them options, but we don't include Bible verses. And I certainly have had people come to say that they would like to do X, Y, Z, and I say that sounds wonderful, but it's not the kind of service that I do. And so suggest a chaplain or a minister that would be able to help them more for what they're looking for. But I have found in the end, with those who have begrudgingly said, oh, you'll do, in the end, they have come forward and said that it was very, very wonderful and that even though there wasn't a deity mentioned, they felt really wonderful about the humanist services. So for those who haven't done it, I would say really it's probably the most fulfilling part I find of being a humanist officiant, is being able to work with families. And I, as Michael, I have done several as well for social services, and they are often the most difficult to bring forth that special person. But through the time that it takes to do it, it really is an inhabiting that person to bring out their special qualities. So I want to thank you for doing what you're doing this evening. And I guess the only question I really had was, how do you feel about open mic, folks?
Mary.
What I have seen is that traditionally, in these types of funerals, there's always tributes from X and Y, and then there's a moment where you invite anyone that would like to stand and say something.
Oh.
And as you say, I've seen it where we're sorry that you said that, but also more frequently, especially Canadians, people are silent, and they're looking at their shoes, and they don't come forward. So in that situation, I have usually spoken to the family ahead of time if they feel they would like an opportunity for people to speak. And I say, if no one comes forward, could you be prepared to say a little thing about when you were in school together or something? And these were generally people who are not in the family. So after the trip, and in the outlines, you'll see all this, the eulogy, the tributes, the from professional colleagues or whatever, and then tributes from the family, and then a chance to speak. So if the family does want to do that, please ask them to be prepared to say something to fill that moment. And then, as all of us probably do, you say, thank you very much, and now we'll have some moments of quiet reflection. We follow that, yes? Okay.
And thank you, Mary. So, and I think the idea of an open mic, if it would only happen if the family actually have requested that, or that's something that they want. It's not something that I would certainly put forward. And there is a masterful, you have to develop a bit of tact around, managing some of those things when there are the run-ons. And so if you can imagine, one of the simple ways that I deal with that is I first of all let people know that we have some time for some brief shared memories. And that if I go to limit your time, it's not because what you have to say isn't important. It's in the interest of allowing other people to share as well. And I also remind them that the celebration continues afterwards in the reception, and that not everything we won't have time to share everything during this time. And so what will happen is that then if somebody is going on, and I'm thinking, if you give people 2 or 3 minutes, is then I'm typically at the side, or I'm seated at that point, near where the speakers are. And then I will stand up, or I will step towards the podium where the speaker is. And if they don't start winding things down, I step a little bit closer, and then I actually will potentially, if they haven't got the message, then I'll put my hand on their back if they haven't really gotten the message, and I'll thank them, and then we'll move on. So it's really having a game plan for some of that. Thank you so much, Julia. And as you'll see, that there are so many ways of doing this, and there is definitely not one size that fits all. So it is that time of the hour. And, as Carol Burnett once said, aren't you glad we had this time together? Just to sing a song or do a dance or two. It seems we just get started, and before you know it, it's time we have to say so long. And of course, she finishes with, and remember, pollution is your problem too. But it's COVID-19 that is our problem. So on behalf of all of you who have tuned in to listen tonight, on behalf of our panelists, Mary Beattie, Michael Wheeler, Lise Chamberlain, Tom Cook, Matthew Bin, Ruth Henrik, and myself. We're really delighted that you were able to tune in. You know, we've worked through there, and I know some of you would have preferred an opportunity to see everybody tonight, and to see who was on the call, and that's a meeting format, and we're certainly able to do that. But tonight really was intended to be a webinar format, as we weren't sure just how many of us would tune in. So if you have suggestions, comments, feedback, please feel free to send that in. And I know some of you had questions that weren't answered, and we have those recorded and we'll send them off. We'll be able to respond to those as well. So on behalf of all of us, may you have the best evening that you can have, what's left of it. Stay safe, be well, and we look forward to our next webinar with you. So good night, everybody.